this update for May 4, 5, and 6, 2023. This is day 437 of the war. Well, I would say middle of the day update or end of the day update, whichever you prefer. So let me quickly check on what's going on in the financial system, I would say in the world, because U.S. Federal Reserve is the center from a financial perspective. That's the sort of financial hub, financial center. So I just want to provide update on what's going on the stress in the system. So as you can see, the primary credit went down from 73 to 5 billion, 5.3 billion. Then a bank term funding program also went down from 81 to 75. So as you can see, the total, if you add up, the stress went down significantly with the collapse of First Republic Bank. Also the stress in FX, meaning demand for US dollar outside of the US is so far is non-existent. The only thing that sort of popped up as a result of the I guess bankruptcy of First Republic Bank is part of this liabilities went from primary credit, looks like, to this other credit. So it used to be 170 and then jumped to 228. So that's 58, and then 5 roughly 63. So 73 to 63. So if you add up, the stress as a whole went down, but not sort of in a clear way where, okay, the crisis is over, because we effectively back to on primary credit back to the level of April 26th. So in other words, it didn't go up much, it just stable, right? And then here we're back to sort of this April 20th 74. So and then if you look at them, interest rates, they somewhat went down, 4.7% now for this bank term funding program. So in other words, the acuteness, it's went down, so there's no clear ramp up in increase in the stress in the system. However, the sort of, if you add, there's another piece of this equation that I wasn't really touching much, and that's deposits, right? Because as I explained before, what happens is you can get in the US right now between, let's say, 5.5 and 5.25. Let's call it 5.20, 5.2 interest on very short term lending to the US government, US treasuries. I think like 3 months can give you 5.2, something along those lines, right? So banks give very little. They cannot afford, as I said before, because they already lend to the borrowers at, let's say, 2-3%, 4%, and they need to earn money. So they cannot give to the depositors, let's say, more than like 1 or at most 2%. Even 2 is way too much. So if they try to match what the US government is offering to depositors, because that's really doesn't matter. They, for depositor, as a depositor, you wouldn't care whether you're going to give to US government or US bank, because if US government gives you more for 5.2 versus US bank gives you 1 or 2, you obviously will go to US government, right? So that's a situation right now, and because banks cannot offer that 5.2, the deposits will continue leaving banks and continue going into funding US government, and that really undermines banking system in the US, and that's why we see these banks going going effectively bankrupt. And as I said, this will continue as long as interest rates are going remain where they are and high. So there are two ways to kind of look at this and sort of how bankrupt it is. One is the value of the hold to maturity investments by the banks went down, but they don't need to market on the market to market. So in other words, on the cash, so it's an accrual basis for those who understand account. There is accrual versus cash. So from accrual perspective, they lost money, but they have not realized those losses because they haven't sort of sold those securities. And if they can hold it for 10, 20, 30 years, then they're going to be okay nominally, right? You still gonna have economic loss on your capital, but from accounting perspective, you're kind of painting the pictures if you're okay. So that's one thing, right? And that's and then the second part is what I'm talking is right now is about the cash side of equation, cash accounting, where banks simply cannot pay these depositors 5.2% and they leave, and that's really, you cannot sit and and kind of play the game. Okay, we have unrealized losses, and we can pretend that they will never be realized, and therefore everything's okay. Here, the money leaving out of the door, and you don't have money, and so this is a cash situation. This is acute near-term problem versus those unrealized losses are sort of more medium-term problem. And so, as you can see, the U.S. banking system is hit from two sides. One is sort of accrual accounting, and it's from that perspective. It's I don't have exact numbers, but semi-bankrupt. And then from a cash perspective, it's becoming semi-bankrupt as depositors taking away their money and giving it to the U.S. government. And so that's why I said as interest rates goes up, and this is done by Federal Reserve, then the flight of these depositors accelerates, and they give more and more to U.S. government. And this is I just want to make it clear, this is not like average person on the street. This is mostly, these deposits are mostly belonging to large corporations, large private equity hedge funds, large wealthy individuals. So this is not who is voting with their feet, this average person on the street. It's really I'd say intelligent money or shrewd money, wealthy, basically. Let's say top 1% of the U.S. is basically voting with their feet and taking their deposits from the U.S. banking system. That's really what's happening, and Europe is actually on the path towards that, but it's way behind right now. I think the interest the interest rate that set up by ECB there is 3.25, I believe. So this is something that Europe may, continental Europe, I mean, may face down the road, but it's not quite there because the differential is not that huge yet, and maybe some people haven't woke up to it and so on. So, but in US is way ahead relative to the rest of the world in all of this. So that's why you see it, first coming up in the US. And so going back to all of these deposits, so there's statistics there, and that says it's released by Federal Reserve. I didn't put it. I probably will start tracking it as well on a regular basis. This is only, unfortunately, quite delayed. It's as of April 26th. Because here we have May 3, but it's kind of like 2 weeks delayed. So there, the deposits went down by roughly 120 billion relative to April 19, so basically prior week. And if you really look from March of 2022, when the whole interest rate increase started in the US, to April 26 of this year, you can see that deposits were 18.2 trillion. Now they 17.1. So you lost 1.1 trillion of deposits in the banking system over the course of this period as a result of increasing interest rates. And this is typically you have more deposits than you as a bank, right? You take deposits from people, or not people, really from institutions, other institutions. So from corporations, from family offices, from wealthy individuals, from hedge funds, private equity, and so on. And then you lend it out to the economy, again, to the corporations as well. To a lot of it is going to real estate and so on, to developers, real estate developers. And so typically you would have more in deposits than what you give out as loans, just sort of to be safe. And it was 18.2 trillion in March versus the loans were 16.8 in the US as a whole. So now it flipped, actually. So you have fewer deposits, it's 17.1 versus the loans is 17.4. This is not the major point. I just want to highlight how the situation flipped onto the opposite. But the most important is the loss of this 1.1 trillion of deposits since March of 2022 till April 26. And as you can see, just out of that 1.1, only in 1 week, from April 19 till April 26, 120 billion were lost. So it's basically 0.1 of a trillion was lost just in 1 week. So in other words, the situation for now is kind of like a disease is again in remission, but it will rear its ugly sort of head, sometime soon. Nobody knows when it's going to blow up again. Maybe in a month, maybe in 2 weeks, maybe in 2 months, maybe in 3 months. You never know. But that's, in other words, we kind of all sitting, because this is kind of like a world financial system. We're all sitting on the same sort of time bomb that's sort of ticking and just waiting to explode at this point. Unless, as I said, interest rates go back down, which is, as I explained before, is nearly impossible to do for Federal Reserve. So we'll see so nobody knows how it's going to play out. We'll sort of be guinea pigs in this one huge experiment that's going to be happening to us. Now let's actually look at next topic in sort of comparing US versus China. So I spoke about the fighter jets that both sides have in a previous video. In this video, we're gonna look at the aircraft carriers, because that's another most important piece of weapon, and it's really, they go kind of like hand in hand, and this is one system that's operating. So rockets, aircraft carriers, and aircraft, right? So aircraft, aircraft carrier carries obviously aircraft. And so what's sort of situation right now? US has 11 aircraft carriers. One new one was built, I believe, in like 2015, I want to say, maybe 2016 or 17, don't remember exact, but it's Gerald Ford. That's a new one, sort of series of aircrafts for the US. The other 10 are older, prior version, and so on. So they typically roughly 300 meters long and about 100,000 metric tons dead weight, so or displacement. And they usually have about up to 100 aircraft, typically like 90, high 80s. So this is actually, you see here, this is Gerald Ford. So as you can see, this is when it was, I think, just sort of dropped into the water, and some probably testing was going on. So it wasn't completely operational at that time. So this is situation on the US side, right? On the Chinese side, the situation is pretty bad for China. And then I would say this is probably one of the reasons we haven't seen invasion yet, because everything else is sort of kind of close to be in place. And I think one of the biggest deterrent for China is actually lack of aircraft carriers. So what China has right now is 2 aircraft carriers. I think Liaoning one is Shandong second one. So Ling is essentially just old Soviet ship. It's totally, I would say, junk, complete junk, and the size is about 50,000 metric tons as displacement. But the more important, it has less than 40 aircraft, so it's actually nothing. Then the other one that China built in the teens, I think they started in 2012 and finished it in 2017, something like that, was the Shandong, but it's still basically improved version of that Soviet ship. I mean, there's a lot of Chinese and their own development, but and so on, but still it's behind its time. Let's put this way. It still has like 45 aircraft. Also like 60,000 metric tons dead weight and so on. So, and you can see it here. This is, you can see that even visually that this is kind of like old technology, because you see this kind of like a jumping board for aircraft when they take off from aircraft carrier. And if you compare, let's say, Gerald Ford, it's all straight, right? There's no jumping board. And the reason for that is because there is electromagnetic catapult that you don't need this jumping board to give you another sort of boost to take off, because they function much better. They show like sort of, there's higher guarantee that aircraft will take off from the aircraft carrier without falling in the water. And this is new one that's being built by the Chinese Fujian. And it's actually was sort of put in the water already, and they sort of going through the final stages, so probably will be ready sometimes in 2024. But that's it. China doesn't. So as you can see, they have like 2. One is complete Soviet junk, and the other one is semi-funk, like behind the time aircraft carrier. So effectively, they have 2. Versus US has 11, and all of those 11 are better than these 2 by huge magnitude. So even this third one that comes online will be simply a match to the Gerald Ford, but there are still 10 others. So and as you can see, even this new project that China is doing, it's still probably worse than the US one, because as you can see, it's very efficient in this Gerald Ford, because you can only see this very small structure to allow as much space for aircraft and operations and so on, versus here this structure is still larger. It's pretty large, so more similar how US had in those previous 10, I think they class Nimitz or something like that, that's called. So as you can see, this is one of the biggest deterrent for China right now, is lack of aircraft carriers, and it takes about 6 to 7 years if you're really efficient to build aircraft carrier. And Chinese kind of, the Chinese industry, even if state owned, by the way, all of the shipyards looks like they owned by state in China. They still much more efficient than the US ones, because in the US it actually gets progressively worse. So this Gerald Ford was built in like 8 years, And the next one that's sort of in the same series, it's going to be built in 10 years. So versus Chinese, they built 6-7 years, about that time frame. But regardless, China will not get parity or even close anywhere in the foreseeable future with the US in terms of aircraft carriers. And that's the biggest so far deterrent, probably, as I said, the reason why the war hasn't happened yet. And let's just look why it's important here in sort of what developments are happening to sort of undermine that deterrent. So, as we all know, China is not self-sufficient. It's extremely dependent on external resources for its functioning. Very similar, by the way, to Japan. Probably better than Japan during World War II, but still pretty bad. It's food not self-sufficient, energy not self-sufficient, and by energy I mean crude oil. Although technically they have a large deposits of coal and they can produce synthetic diesel and gasoline the similar way that Germany did during World War II, but they don't have operating facilities to do that yet, and it takes time. So they're not ready from that perspective to convert coal into gasoline and diesel fuel. So as you can see, so they are importing all of whatever they need mostly by the sea, with exception of Russia, Kazakhstan, where they're getting by pipelines. So even, let's say, if there is, so it's very clear that China has more superior missiles, and including anti-aircraft missiles, so they can technically destroy U.S. Aircraft carriers. But if they keep sufficiently far away from China, they can sort of create a ring of blockade for China by standing just simply far away, and it's going to be as efficient as if they standing sort of near the shore of China, and effectively all of the trade, all of the supply to China collapses, and obviously leads to social unrest and collapsing of the government in China. And so that's one of the biggest deterrents for China to start invasion. But the factors that are undermining all of that is now that there is effectively connection between China, Russia, and effectively Kazakhstan could be controlled by China. There's a huge influence in Kazakhstan from China. So now China has direct flow of crude oil, which is what they need, and food. There's really two key components that China needs to wage the war. So Russia has, as I said, they had a bumper crop, a huge crop that they don't know what to do with. They have tons of crude oil, as we all know. Kazakhstan has a lot of crude oil, a large exporter as well. Has a uranium production as well, one of the largest producer of uranium of the world. So you essentially have pretty much everything you need. You have your kind of like back covered. The only problem still is logistical, is there is not enough pipelines and so on. So, but that can be sort of fixed in relatively short order. Not definitely in 2-3 months. It's probably in a year and a half. That can be fixed. And so again, so the situation is kind of like we are in a situation where it's unstable balance for now, and with the tendency of going in favor of China as the time passes by. Every sort of day tilts the situation in the Chinese favor, and so that's sort of what we're observing, and that's probably one of the main reasons why China has not tried invading Taiwan as of now, and hopefully they won't. The other sort of nuclear option that China has, as I mentioned before, they have control on rare earth metals, which are basically basis for electronics, key component resource for making electronics, including semiconductors, chips, and all of that. So if China stops export of it, essentially West does not have electronics anymore. Even let's say West controls still Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is in Taiwan. Let's say everything, there is still control. China doesn't get Taiwan. You still don't have key resource to manufacture electronics, and obviously you can live with what you have, but pretty quickly society will start. You're gonna have really huge problem in society and social unrest everywhere around the world. So, so this is kind of like balance that sort of exists, and I'm taking aside nuclear part. That sort of, for now, keeps the situation in very in balance. But as I said, it's unstable balance. That's gonna be out of balance fairly soon. Now let's actually look at a little bit at Russia's military facilities. It's not complete. They just give high level and sort of where the main sources are coming. So I mentioned this before. I spoke about this before, but I just want to do a little bit more, I guess, comprehensive look at it. So the main, so let's just look first at tanks. They are red. So the main production facility is slightly kind of like north of Yekaterinburg. I think it's less than 100 kilometers north. That's pretty modern, very well maintained, outfitted manufacturing facility there. It's called Nizhny Tagil, and it's more like a combined industrial complex. So there's a lot of stuff is sort of how to say, being manufactured on site. So there is a huge economies of scale there. It's like a huge city, huge, I don't know how to best describe, literally military industrial complex on its own. And then the second sort of kind of like a shadow tank factory is in Chelyabinsk. It's not as in good shape, not as well maintained, but it's sort of backup in a way to the one in the north of Yekaterinburg. So this is kind of like, as you can see, Russian tank manufacturing capabilities are fairly far removed from any threats, right? They have covered by China, Kazakhstan here, and so, and obviously far from Far East, fairly far from Europe. So it's pretty well situated. So this is the tank manufacturing facility. Then orange one here, which is also pretty nearby in Kurhan, it's manufacturing of BMP 3, which is the newer one, which is actually a decent one. It's not obviously the perfect one, but it's not bad one relative to BMP 1 and 2, which are basically kamikaze machines. This one is actually okay. Could be better, but it's definitely not terrible one. So so that's there is dedicated facility there, and so they increase production of BMP 3. It's probably may not be enough for the losses, because losses are pretty high. That's a problem on the Russian side, is that losses are pretty high, and we really need to kind of like World War II level production to compensate for the losses. But that's not a problem of sort of so much of manufacturing facilities as the poor performance on the battlefield. But this is kind of like a rubber band. This can be fairly easily expanded and increased significantly, with obviously lag in time. Probably will take a year or so, but this is sort of not a bottleneck for the Russian military supplies. Then in the same area, you can see there is manufacturing of the cannons or the bores. So this one is in Perm. There is pretty large facility there. It's for artillery systems, and then also in Yekaterinburg does both artillery and also smooth bore for tanks. So as you can see, everything is very compact. There is a huge economies of scale and efficiencies here. And there's also steel manufacturing, steel smelters and so on here as well, large ones as well. So everything is super, as I said, efficient, super cheap, especially relative to the West, where it's all, made as if it's like medieval ages in terms of shops and super inefficient and so on. So in some ways it's sort of replay on how Germany was doing during World War II. I mean, eventually they sort of changed, but it was too late for the change by the time Germany changed. And so this is in some ways similar situation right now between Russia and the West in terms of manufacturing all of this artillery systems and tanks. So this is obviously the main sort of military components on the battlefield. That's the most important right now. The other important components is let's look at helicopter manufacturing, and that one is Russia has two, which is Mi-28. This is attack helicopter and Ka-52. So Mi-28 is terrible. Ka-52 is really great and probably I would almost want to say one of the best in the world. So Mi-28 is actually manufactured in Rostov-on-Don, which is here. Actually, technically, Ukraine can try to sort of attack it and sort of influence operations there. This is, let's say, super juicy target. That's where Ukraine should be focusing instead of like shelling, villages across the border in Kursk and Bryansk region. They should attack. This is very close, very, fairly easy to do, relatively, I would say. However, this is, as I said, so they're not great. Let's put it this way. The Ka-52 are made here near Khabarovsk. So this is obviously very vulnerable, as you can see, to attacks from Japan, South Korea, and so on. So this is fairly vulnerable here. And then in terms of Sukhoi, Su, fighter jets, and so on, it's also here in Far East in this town called Komsomolsk na Amuri. And so essentially Russian aircraft and helicopter production, for some reason, not even sure why, concentrated in the Far East effectively. Then also important place, well, somewhat important, is Nizhny Novgorod. There's also some manufacturing of aircraft there. It's MiG, but that company, or how the best described is engineering part of it is essentially brain dead, let's put it this way. And so it's not capable of anything. So in other words, there is a facility, but there is no head to develop good designs for it. So it's kind of like dying essentially. But then there is also production of S-400 anti-aircraft missile system here, so which is obviously important as well. So this is kind of like high level. Didn't look at the small arms. They are much more scattered, more closer to Russia's western border, but that's, I would say, least relevant part because that's not what really drives results. I don't know if I mentioned the majority of results are driven by artillery, shelling. They account for about 75% of the losses, could be up to 85% of the losses. So as you can imagine, that's where that's what drives results in this war so far. Now let's actually move to the situation in Ukraine. So Wagner mercenaries announced that they are withdrawing from Bakhut at the end of the day, May 9. So So effectively what happened is that the most capable Russian military organization is, how to say, taking out of the picture, or it's not destroyed, that's not correct technical word, because they retain their organization, they retain the core, which is the most important. They just don't have muscles right now, and they don't have shells. So they are sort of disabled but not destroyed. They could be easily rebuilt and easily thrown back in the battle, but for now they out of the picture. And this is actually being done. It's not Ukrainian success. It's a success of internal infighting in Russia, where there is a fight with a regular Russian minister of defense, and so far Wagner Group lost. And Russia is a very bureaucratic country, and that's why the part of why Russia always, in the end, even though technically it wins, but really it loses in the long run, is because of all of this bureaucracy. And so again, this gives another sort of point towards, okay, Russia is going to lose in this war in the long run, just because of its own nature, that's sort of self-destructive to itself, and not sort of basically whatever is good there, they are better at destroying it than the Ukrainian side. This is obviously a big positive for Ukraine. Ukraine paid a huge price to stop this machine. Really huge human price, like on the human side, that really Ukraine cannot afford for much longer. For example, just to give you an idea, is that the age for the subscription or to the army was reduced from 27 to 25. It doesn't mean that there are no that people at people at the age of, let's say, 20, 21 are not called into army. They are, but some of them were sort of like not called because they didn't have prior experience. And so effectively this is they would be called only if they reach age of 27. So now it's reduced to 25. That's very clear sign Ukraine is running out of the human resources. It's not imminent, but it's definitely a problem somewhere on the horizon. So let's call it medium-term problem for Ukraine eventually, the way it goes. So this is a quick update on that situation. Now let's do quick walk through the front line. There is not many changes. Russian side is just waiting for Ukrainian offensive. By the way, there is also Russian military administration is evacuating Ukrainian civilians from the front line, from the Zaporizhya, from their near rear on the Zaporizhya section of the front line in this area. There is evacuation. There is also evacuation in, apparently, basically there's evacuation going on stealth. So there's announced evacuation that's sort of happening where I'm showing here on Zaporizhya front line, right behind the front line. And then there is more evacuation along this whole area. Let's call it like North Azov, this North Azov area. And so there is evacuation going on there. Don't know how, on the progress of it, there is not enough information, but Russian side is definitely trying to take Ukrainian civilians with them. To be fair, some people really want to, be part of Russia, want to become Russian citizens. That's a reality. That's truth. Doesn't change anything in terms of, Ukraine, what Ukraine wants, what the majority of Ukrainian population wants. But I just want to be fair and very upfront. There is part of population that really wants to live in Russia and wants to be sort of Russian citizens. And I think, they move to Russia. I think that's the best way to divorce for Ukraine and those people who want to live, who want to become Russian citizens. So now let's do walk through the front line. Gonna do it in a clockwise fashion. So the situation along the state border remains fairly intense. Incursions of the Ukrainian sort of reconnaissance groups into Russian territory, or attempts, shelling from both sides, and so on. This is sort of normal situation, fairly tense, as I said. Everybody's expecting this offensive, so everybody's on high alert. Now let's move to North Luhansk front line. Things here are quiet, nothing major. As always, there is some skirmishes in this forest, but really, from a big perspective, there's nothing going on here at all. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. Things here also frozen essentially, with exception of small portion in Bakhut, and let's just kind of look at it. So basically, Ukrainian troops are holding really small part, really most western part of Bakhut. Just sort of call it nominally that Russian forces don't fully capture Bakhut at this point. So there is small portion of Bakhmut that's still being held by Ukrainian forces, and it just for me it just totally reminds the picture in Stalingrad in November of 1942, with sort of Russians being their Germans and the Ukrainian side being the Soviet side. So the situation is super ripe for counter-offensive here in this area. But as I said, I don't think the Ukrainian side has A, enough resources, B, skills and knowledge and everything to actually do two things at the same time. This is how the situation was progressing. As you can see, it's completely stuck recently. This is again the same picture, just to show that everything else is on freeze here, essentially. Now let's look quickly at Central Donbass front line. Things here are also kind of on freeze. Basically, some sort of Russian attacks, but they more sort of like painting the picture attacks, just to kind of keep Ukrainian side busy and sort of kind of say, oh, we're still attacking, we're still doing something. There was a Ukrainian probing attack on south of Ohledar on 2 locations. It was just probing attack. There was nothing major. It was, I think, on May 5th. Then that's when it happened. But this is Avdiivka. Again, nothing major is happening here. Situation is stable for now. Again, let's just look at Zaporizhya front line. As probably this is going to be the area of sort of where the operations are going to happen. So again, this is just showing what happened on May 5th. There was, again, nothing major, even there is an error, but it was really probing attack, nothing of significance. So what looks so far is that Ukrainian command is trying to sort of attack straight south of Orikhiv towards, and probably Tokmak is, first initial objective, which I would say is probably not the best way to do it, because it's just, how to say, hitting your head against the wall, because Russian side is on extreme alert, super prepared in this area. So again, this is going to be to extend suicidal attack that may lead to nowhere. But at the same time, it's so clear to everyone that this is going to happen somewhere here in the Zaporizhya front line, that there is no element of surprise, which is super important. In this way, this reminds Kursk battle, where there was obviously zero surprise. I think Soviet command even did preemptive artillery strike on the German troops that were preparing to attack. So it's a very similar situation here, and it's obviously very difficult situation for Ukrainian side, and it's double difficult because since don't have, Ukrainian side doesn't have skills of the German troops, doesn't have quality of the German command, and so on. So this is going to be a super difficult situation to overcome, which I'm not sure that they will be able to do that. But we'll see what happens. Again, this is Tokmak, so the first, the first objective, obviously, towards Tokmak. Apparently, this is my attempt to read sort of Ukrainian command and what Russian side is doing. I would personally would not never do this way, but that's just what the thinking looks like there. And then probably then the next one is probably something towards Azov Sea and attempts to move to Crimea, and then probably another one attempt to move to Mariupol. That looks like a sort of the plan on Ukrainian sides and what Russia is expecting, basically. As I said before, I explained in the past videos, I wouldn't do that way. And then in terms of timing, as I said before, it looks like nothing is going to happen till, or probability of anything happening till May 15 is extremely low. Still possible, but for two main reasons, as I said, two indicators, is that Ukrainian president is still sort of touring Europe, and he's going to be back, I think, May 15 in Ukraine. And the way he is, he's super micromanager. So he's probably want to sort of hold his hand everywhere, even he has no clue what he's doing. But nevertheless, he wants to be present. And the other one is the ground is still fairly soft. It's getting it got better, but sort of the trend is in the right direction, but it's not quite there. And probably next 10 days will be sufficient for the ground to get there. So things sort of will start aligning. At the same time, again, there's zero element of surprise. That's a huge negative for Ukrainian side in this upcoming offensive. So we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.